Have you ever given so much of yourself to the people you love? So quietly, so completely, that one day you looked in the mirror and couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked if you were okay. I'm 63 years old. I have 2 grown children, 4 grandchildren, and a house that used to feel like home. I say used to because for a long time, it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a hotel I was running for free, one where I cooked the meals, paid the bills, fixed what broke, and smiled through all of it because that's what mothers do. That's what I told myself. Anyway, my name is not important. What matters is this story. Because I know some of you are living some version of it right now. And if you are, I want you to hear what happened to me. All of it. So you can decide for yourself what kind of ending you want. Let me start at the beginning. My husband, Raymond, passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack. He went on a Tuesday morning, sitting in his favorite chair by the kitchen window, coffee in hand. The doctors said it was fast. I've spent a long time trying to find comfort in that, and some days I do. Raymond was a quiet, steady man. He handled the finances. He paid the bills, kept the files organized, knew exactly what we owed and when. I handled everything else. The cooking, the kids, the house, the appointments, the everything else that doesn't get a name but takes up most of a life. When he died, I learned very quickly just how much he had been carrying. We had a house in Columbus, Ohio. A 4-bedroom place on Maple Crest Drive that we'd bought back in 1989. The mortgage was long paid off by then, which Raymond always said was the one thing he was proudest of. But paid off doesn't mean free. There's property taxes, homeowners insurance, the utility bills, gas, electric, water, the internet, which by that point had become as necessary as air, trash pickup, HOA fees because our neighborhood had one of those. And then the things that just break, the water heater, the gutters, the furnace, the roof. A house is never done costing you money. I didn't fully understand that until Raymond was gone, and the bills started arriving addressed only to me. I was 52 years old and I was terrified. My daughter, Teresa, was 26 at the time. She had just married her husband, a man named Douglas Pratt, and the two of them were living in a rented apartment across town. My son, Walter, was 29, working in logistics, and he had recently moved back home after a breakup. He said it would be temporary. 6 months, maybe, just until he got back on his feet. I said, of course. He was my son. What I should tell you is that I was also terrified of being alone in that house. Raymond and I had been married 31 years. I didn't know how to live by myself, so maybe part of me needed Walter there as much as he needed to be there. Maybe that's where it all started. With 2 people who needed each other for the wrong reasons and never talked about it honestly. Walter got back on his feet within about 8 months. He got a promotion. He started dating again. He bought a truck, a nice one, a Ford F-150, fully loaded, with payments I later found out were over $600 a month. He started going out more. Weekends away. A trip to Vegas with his friends. He seemed happy. He was still living in my house, and I was still paying every bill. I told myself it was fine. He was recovering. He'd had a hard year. He helped me carry groceries in sometimes. He took out the trash without being asked. Most of the time. He was company. I told myself these things and I believed them, because the alternative, that I was being taken advantage of by my own son, was too painful to sit with. Then Teresa and Douglas hit a rough patch. They'd only been married 2 years when Douglas lost his job and their landlord raised the rent at the same time. Teresa called me on a Sunday afternoon, crying. Could they stay with me just for a little while? Just until Douglas found something new? I said, of course. She was my daughter. So now there were 4 of us in that house. Me, Walter, Teresa, and Douglas. And I was still paying every bill. The property tax on that house was $4,200 a year. The homeowner's insurance was just over $1,800. Electric averaged about $160 a month in the summer and close to $200 in the winter. Those Columbus winters will humble you. Gas ran about $90 to $120. Water and sewer, 50-something. Internet, $89. Trash, $30. HOA fees, $40 a month. And that doesn't count groceries, which I was buying for 4 people, or the maintenance things. The new garbage disposal, the dryer belt that broke in March, the gutter cleaning every fall. I was bringing in a little over $2,000 a month in Social Security survivor benefits and a small pension from the school district where I'd worked as a paraprofessional for 18 years. Some months I dipped into savings. Raymond had left us with a decent nest egg, and I told myself I was using it wisely, investing in my family. I want you to understand something. I never handed my children a bill. I never sat them down and said, "Here's what this house costs, let's divide it up." I just paid. Month after month, I paid and I smiled and I made Sunday dinners, and I listened to their problems, and I gave advice when they asked, and I stayed quiet when they didn't, and I told myself this was love. But there was another voice, a quieter one, that sometimes whispered to me late at night when I couldn't sleep. This isn't love. This is fear. You're afraid that if you ask for anything, they'll leave. And you're more afraid of being alone than you are of being drained dry. I didn't listen to that voice for a very long time. Douglas found a new job about 4 months after they moved in. A decent one, in insurance sales. Teresa was working too, at a dental office. Between the two of them, they were making good money. They started talking about buying a house of their own. They went to open houses on weekends. They had a savings goal, they said. They were saving their money in my house, while I paid the electric bill. I'm not proud of the bitterness in that sentence, but I'm not going to pretend it wasn't there. Walter, meanwhile, had been promoted again. He was making, by my best estimate, somewhere around $70,000 a year. He drove his expensive truck. He bought a big television for his room. I remember him carrying it in, and I held the door open for him, and he said, "Thanks, Mom," and went right upstairs. He started dating a woman named Kendra, and she came over for dinner most Friday nights. I cooked for her too. She was polite. She probably had no idea what was happening, honestly. How could she? 2 years passed. Then 3. Then 4. Teresa and Douglas never bought that house. The savings goal moved, the way goals do when you're comfortable and there's no pressure. They took a vacation to Cancun. They got new phones. Douglas bought a boat, a small one. A fishing boat, which he trailered to a lake in Delaware every other weekend. My daughter called it his therapy. Meanwhile, I went to my doctor in the fall of my 61st year, and she told me my blood pressure was high. I wasn't sleeping well, and I was showing signs of chronic stress. She asked me about my life. I told her I was fine. I told her I was just getting older. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Lorraine, who is taking care of you?" Lorraine. That's close enough to my name that you can call me that. I didn't have an answer for her. I drove home from that appointment and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights on. I could see the shape of Walter moving around, opening the refrigerator I'd stocked, standing in the kitchen I'd paid to heat. Upstairs, Teresa and Douglas's light was on too. The television was going. I could see the flicker of it from the driveway. 4 people in that house. 1 bill payer. I went inside and I made dinner like I did every night, but something had shifted. A little, a very little, but it had shifted. The thing that finally broke me open, and I want to be careful about how I say this, because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a fight, it wasn't a moment anyone else would have noticed, was a Tuesday in February. I was doing the taxes. I always did them myself, had since Raymond died, because we couldn't afford an accountant every year on my fixed income. I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The property tax receipts, the utility statements, the insurance documents, all of it. And I sat there with a legal pad, and I added it up. Not the monthly numbers I already knew in my head, the annual total. Mortgage, 0, thank God for Raymond. Property taxes, $4,200. Homeowner's insurance, $1,820. Gas, $1,260. It's water and sewer, $640. C8. Trash, $3,068. Trash, $300. 4 people, $80. Groceries, rue estimate, maintenance and repairs over the past 12 months. I added up the receipts. $3,340. I sat there looking at that number at the bottom of the page. $23,556 per year, coming out of my savings and my fixed income, to run a house where 3 other working adults lived comfortably and paid nothing. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I heard Teresa call from upstairs. "Mom, is dinner almost ready? We're starving up here." I closed the legal pad. I went to the kitchen. I made dinner, but I had seen the number. And once you see a number like that, you can't unsee it. I want to tell you that I marched upstairs that night and laid it all out, and we had a productive family conversation about financial responsibility. That's not what happened. What happened is that I spent the next 3 weeks turning the situation over in my mind like a stone I kept picking up and putting back down. I thought about Raymond, who would have handled this so much better than me. I thought about what it meant that my children, who I had raised to be good people, had somehow arrived at adulthood without ever asking a single question about who was keeping the lights on. Not one question. That bothered me as much as the money, I think. The not asking. Because here's the thing. I understand that sometimes people don't ask because they assume someone else is handling it. When you've lived somewhere, and the lights have always come on, and the heat has always worked and the refrigerator has always been full, maybe you do just stop seeing it. Maybe it becomes invisible the way air is invisible. Maybe they really, genuinely did not think about it. But they were adults. Teresa was 31 years old. Walter was 34. Douglas was 33. These were not children. These were people with jobs and savings accounts and credit cards and car payments and opinions about the economy. Not one of them had ever once sat down with me and said, "Mom, what does it cost to run this house? Can I help?" Not once. In April, I made an appointment with a realtor named Sandra Kowalski, a woman I'd met through a neighbor, just to ask some questions, not to sell the house, just to understand what I had. Sandra came over on a Thursday morning while the kids were at work, and she walked through every room taking notes, and at the end, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me that in the current Columbus market, my house would likely sell somewhere between $310,000 and $340,000. $310,000. I had sat in that house watching my savings drain for 4 years, and there was $310,000 sitting in the walls around me. Sandra asked if I was thinking of selling. I said I was thinking of a lot of things. That night I called my friend Paulette Monroe, who I have known since we were both young mothers pushing strollers around the neighborhood back in 1988. Paulette has never minced a word in her life. I told her everything. The legal pad, the numbers, the doctor's appointment, the realtor, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lorraine, when are you going to stop auditioning for sainthood and start living your life?" I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. "You know what I think?" Paulette said. "I think you've been scared this whole time. Scared they'll be angry. Scared they'll think you're a bad mother. Scared they'll leave. But baby, look around. They're already gone. They're in that house with you, and they are completely, totally gone." I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. She was right. My children were physically present and emotionally absent. They loved me, I believe they did, in the way people love the things they take for granted, the way you love air, invisible, assumed, always there. I decided not to say anything. I want to be honest about that choice, because I know some of you are thinking, and one of the commenters on a video like this would certainly say, "Why didn't you just open your mouth? Why didn't you sit them down and tell them?" And that's a fair question. It is. Looking back, I wish I had done exactly that years earlier. I wish I'd had the courage to call a family meeting in year 1 and say, "Here's what this house costs, and here's what I need from each of you." But I didn't. I was afraid of the conversation. I was afraid of the look on my children's faces, that look of shock or defensiveness or, worst of all, irritation, like I was being difficult. I was afraid of becoming a burden in their eyes. I was afraid that asking for help would make me less of a mother somehow, as if a good mother is one who never needs anything. That's a lie women of my generation were raised on, and I ate it whole. So instead of talking, I planned. I found a 55-plus community called Winding Brook Estates in Dublin, Ohio, about 20 minutes from Columbus. Clean, quiet, beautiful little townhomes. A community center. A pool I actually intended to use. 2 bedrooms, which was more than enough for me. The rent was $1,400 a month, which was, I noted with some dark humor, less than I was spending on utilities and groceries alone in my own house. I put down an application in May. I was approved in June, I did not tell my children. I want to pause here and say, I know that sounds cold. I know some of you are already forming an opinion about that decision, but I want you to understand where I was in my life at that point. I was 62 years old. I was exhausted. I was scared. And I had learned, over 4 years, that the people living in my house were not in the habit of noticing things that I never pointed out to them. I had a feeling, and I was right, that if I announced I was moving, there would be a conversation. And in that conversation, promises would be made. Adjustments, contributions. And I would believe those promises, because I am their mother, and I want to believe the best of my children. And then 6 months later, we would be right back where we started, except now there would be resentment on all sides. I didn't want that. I wanted a clean break. Not out of anger, out of self-preservation. I spent the summer quietly. I sorted through 30 years of accumulated life in that house. I donated 4 carloads of things to Goodwill. I sold some furniture. I packed boxes and stored them in the back of my bedroom closet, behind the winter coats. Every morning I made breakfast, and every evening I made dinner, and I smiled and I listened, and I was their mother, and I was also, quietly and deliberately, preparing to leave. Teresa noticed I seemed different, once. She caught me looking out the back window at the yard and she said, "You okay, Mom? You seem far away." I said I was just tired, which was true. She nodded and went back to her phone. On the 15th of August, the movers came. I had arranged for them to arrive at 9 in the morning, which I knew was after both Walter and Teresa and Douglas would have left for work. I had been deliberate about the timing. I packed the last of my things the night before, moving quietly, so this were just the ordinary sounds of a house settling. The movers were efficient. By noon, everything I wanted to take was gone from Maple Crest Drive. I left a letter on the kitchen table. I'd written it and rewritten it many times. The final version was 2 pages, handwritten. I told them I loved them. I told them I was well. I gave them my new address and my phone number, both of which they already had. I told them that the house would be going on the market in September, that they had until September 1st to make other arrangements, and that I would be splitting the proceeds of the sale between myself and the 2 of them, equally. Something I did not have to do, something I chose to do, because I am their mother, and that has not changed. And then, at the very end of the letter, I included the legal pad page, the one with the numbers, the annual total at the bottom. I folded it inside the letter so they would see the words first, and then the numbers. $23,556 per year, for 4 years. I did the math for them at the bottom. I drove away from Maple Crest Drive on the 15th of August at 12:47 in the afternoon. I remember the time exactly, because I looked at the clock on the dashboard and thought, this is what the rest of my life starts. I cried for about 3 miles. And then I turned on the radio, and Stevie Wonder was playing. And I thought Raymond would have found that very funny, because Raymond loved Stevie Wonder, and so I laughed a little too. And by the time I pulled into Winding Brook Estates, I had done both things, the crying and the laughing, and I was ready. My new neighbor came out to introduce herself while the movers were bringing in my couch. Her name was Dorothy Fenn, a small, bright-eyed woman of 68. Who had moved to Winding Brook after her own kids grew up and scattered across 3 states. She brought me a plate of lemon bars wrapped in cellophane. I stood there in the doorway of my new home, holding those lemon bars, and thought, this is already better. Walter called at 6:17 that evening. He did not say hello. The first thing he said was, "Mom, what is this letter?" I told him it was exactly what it looked like. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you? Are you okay?" I told him I was perfectly fine. Better than fine. He said, "I don't understand. Why didn't you say something? If you needed help with the bills." "Walter," I said, and I kept my voice very calm. "I needed you to ask." He didn't have a response to that. I let the silence sit there between us. "The utilities will be in your name starting September 1st, I told him. "You and Teresa and Douglas will need to figure out the arrangements. I have spoken with a real estate attorney, and the sale of the house will proceed as outlined in the letter. You'll each receive a portion of the proceeds." He started to say something about timing, about needing more time, about not being ready. I listened. Then I said, "Walter, you've had 4 years. I love you very much. I'll talk to you soon." And I hung up. I want to tell you that felt powerful and triumphant. Honestly, it felt terrible. He was my son. I had held him when he was 3 days old. I had driven him to baseball practice and sat in emergency rooms with him and cried at his college graduation. Hanging up on him felt like cutting a wire with my bare hands. But I also knew, and this is the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it, that if I stayed on that phone, his need would have softened me. His confusion would have made me doubt myself. His voice saying "Mom" in that particular way would have made me want to fix it, to go back, to say forget the letter, forget the numbers, I'm coming home. So I hung up. And I sat in my new living room with the boxes not yet unpacked, and I held myself together very deliberately, piece by piece. Teresa called 40 minutes later. She was crying, not angry. That came later, in smaller waves. But genuinely crying, shocked, the kind of crying that comes when you realize something about your life that you wish you hadn't. She kept saying, "I didn't know, Mom. I really didn't know." I believed her. I still do. That's almost the saddest part. "I know you didn't," I told her. "That's the thing I needed you to think about. We would have helped," she said, "if we'd known." "I know," I said, and I did know. And also, I'd been right there 4 years. Not knowing is a choice too, even when it doesn't feel like one. We talked for a long time that night, she and I, more honestly than we had talked in years. She told me about the stress she and Douglas had been under, things I hadn't known. I told her about the doctor's appointment, and the blood pressure, and the number on the legal pad. We both cried. It wasn't resolved. Something like this doesn't resolve in one phone call, but it was real, and it was the first real conversation we'd had in too long. Douglas called the next morning and apologized without qualification or excuse. I hadn't expected that. I respected it. I told him so. The house sold in October, 11 days on market, 2 offers. It's sold for $328,000. After the agent's commission, and the attorney's fees, and the closing costs, there was $294,000 left. I divided it in 3 equal parts. My children each received $98,000. Mine is sitting in a CD, earning interest, waiting to be decided about. I have not decided yet, and that is fine. I am 63 years old and I have time. I have been at Winding Brook for 10 months now. My blood pressure is normal. I sleep 7 hours most nights. I swim 3 mornings a week in the community pool. And Dorothy Fenn and I have coffee on Tuesday afternoons. And sometimes she brings lemon bars, and sometimes I bring them, and we sit on her patio and talk about everything and nothing. I see Teresa most Sundays. We go to church together, the one she and Douglas found near their new apartment, and afterward we get lunch. Just the 2 of us usually, and we talk like women now, not just like mother and daughter, though we are still that too. She is better. I am better. We are not what we were before, but what we were before was not entirely honest, and maybe this is more real, even if it's sometimes harder. Walter and I are still finding our way. He is proud, my son, in the way Raymond was proud, where apologies come out sideways as improvements, and you have to learn to hear them. He came to help me hang pictures in October. Drove over with his drill and his level, and spent 3 hours getting everything straight. When he left, he hugged me for longer than usual. That was his apology. I took it. I don't tell this story to make my children look like villains. They are not villains. They are people who were given too much comfort for too long without ever being asked to notice it, and they rose to exactly the level that was expected of them, which is to say, they didn't rise at all. That's on me too. I know that. The mother who never asks for anything eventually teaches her children that she needs nothing. And then, she wonders why they never offer. If you are somewhere in this story right now, if you are that mother, or if you are starting to recognize yourself in those children, I want you to know that the conversation you are afraid of is not as dangerous as the silence you are living in. I wish I had opened my mouth in year 1. I wish I had sat them down at the kitchen table and said, "Here is what love costs. Here is what this house costs. Here is what I need from you." Not as a confrontation, as an invitation, to be a family that sees each other clearly. I didn't do that, but I did something else. I let the truth speak for itself when I finally got out of the way. And then I went and made myself a life. I am not a saint. I am not a martyr. I am a 63-year-old woman who loved her family so much she forgot to love herself. Until one Tuesday in February, when she sat at a kitchen table with a legal pad and did the math. Do the math, honey. Whatever your version of the math is. The number at the bottom is trying to tell you something.